line, who has been a senior tax advisor at the Norwegian tax administration for 25 years now, and also worked in the World Bank Group as a senior public sector specialist. We also have Sintayeu Mitiku, who is an IT advisor at the Tax Transformation Program. Sintayeu is a digital transformation expert with over 18 years of experience in tax administration and public finance management across multiple countries. It will bring the perspective and the story of Ethiopia. Last but not least, Joy Dubai. Joy is the digital transformation lead at the African Tax Administration Forum, ATAF. She's also a member of the OECD Forum of Tax Administration in the Tax Administration 3.0 project. Like Celeste, Joy as well, she's currently pursuing a PhD in law with a focus on international tax law at the University of Vienna. All right, I think without further ado, I will pass now to Anders to kickstart the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio, for chairing today's webinar. Let me talk a little bit about why we think now is the time to rethink the tax identification numbers. So I put together just a few pointers to kick off the discussion. So when I got involved in this agenda a few years ago, we looked at how do we make sure that the TIN is unique? How do we make sure it's being used throughout the tax administration? But it was actually much more fundamental issues at stake. So the first thing is, how do we know that there are new people coming into the tax space, right? That could be people that are coming on a work visa, there could be new companies and so on. So if we think about TINs, it's really the way to track who forms part of the tax base. Those that are tax liable because they have income, they sell assets and so on. The second reason why we think it's time to focus on TINs is really the need to improve taxpayer services. So if you look at a typical tax administration, one of the key services is to pre-fill tax returns because it takes a lot of burden off the taxpayer's shoulders. But without a unique ID number, you're not going to get the information to do that. So we believe TINs are important for taxpayer services. It's of course also on the compliance side important. We see many tax administrations where data is siloed within the different departments. So registration may have one database, audit may have another, investigation, a third one, so forth. And again, TINs where basically bring information about taxpayer together, enabling a 360-degree view of the taxpayer. And of course, also on data matching, we know from empirical studies going back to the 80s, and when we have information, third-party information, a compliance rate go up dramatically. And again, you need a TIN to have that functionality. Also looking at the country where I'm sitting right now, the United States, the authority that pushed for TINs was not the tax authority, but the Treasury Department that wanted to be able to offset tax money owed to payments that the Treasury were paying for work carried out under government contracts. So what is the challenge here? What is the complexity? Well, one of them is that over the years, the digital ecosystem has grown quite dramatically. National IDs have become more prevalent, and we begin to see ID in many parts of the economy. So TINs are no longer as dominant as it used to be. And the question is, how do tax administrations work with other parts of the digital ecosystem? And to what extent should they rely on other IDs? So we know from our conversations with clients that some are very reluctant to rely on other ID systems, preferring their own TINs. We also have to say that other ID systems would not necessarily include all of the entities you would have in a TIN. So for example, a foreign company that has to register for VAT purposes, of course, would not be registered by the National Company Register, as an example, right? So that brings to the fore, what kind of relationship should the tax authority have? And what we have been advocating is to seek win-win relationships. So for example, the company registry would like to have a fast approval process that also include taxes, because you cannot think a company would be able to exist without having a tax identification number. So there's an interest. Similarly, if the tax authority finds out that the company is engaged in crime, it should also be, the company should be deregistered also from the company registry. So there are some of these win-win situations. They exist in many areas. For example, in public procurement, you also see the procurement authority want to know whether a company has a certain turnover, and the tax authority will have that information. So the more these win-win relationships can be created, the more there's a reinforcement of the tax identification number and of the data that entities provide to the tax authority. So this brings up, and this is something for discussion later during this webinar, what are the critical decisions, the must-get-right decisions in designing the TIN to avoid people drowning in useless data? As a colleague put it, data is like plastic. There's too much of it, and it's hard to get rid of. So what we need to make sure is we get the right kind of data. Let me finally mention that we have a forthcoming publication on TINs by the International Center for Tax and Development and the World Bank that we look forward to sharing with you in due course. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anders, for setting the scene and for the conceptual clarity that you're bringing to the discussion. I think most of the points you made will be touched throughout the conversation today. I'll share the floor with I'll give the floor to Celeste then to walk us through the evidence from research. Thank you. We can see your screen perfectly, Celeste.
Yeah, thank you, Fabrizio. Sorry. So I'm just going to present some evidence from ICTD research on the theme that has been introduced by Anders, starting from this slide. So we know that the tax register is an essential tool for contemporary tax administration, and that taxpayer identification numbers are an even more important component of it. In fact, they uniquely identify every entity that is in the tax register. However, it's also important to note that good tax registers must be accurate, among other characteristics, up to date, and including all the tax liable entities. However, there is no agreement on whether individuals and more small enterprises who are not tax liable should be on the register. And despite the fact that tax registers should always include a proportion of taxpayers that are temporarily not liable for taxes, it is also true that many tax registers in African tax administration contain large proportions, if not the majority, of unproductive taxpayer records. This is, okay, yeah. This is due to a practice that is very common in tax administrations in Africa, which is of keeping expanding the tax register for multiple reasons. First, they want to signal effort to improve revenue collection to politicians, to development and to development agencies and aid agencies, driven by the belief that there is a revenue gain, a substantial revenue gain in registering the informal sector, which is often thought as a pool of small informal businesses that manage to evade the tax system. And also the belief that by including them in the tax system, there is a wider culture of compliance to build and improve perception of the tax systems, as well as starting some accountability cycles. It's also true that in a context where personal IDs is not easily identifiable, tax agencies are required to issue TINs for non-tax reasons and tax clearance certificates. However, the research finds that these mass registration efforts have multiple implications, starting from equity implications. In fact, these registration efforts often disproportionately capture small businesses, and they miss higher income potential taxpayers, as well as adding on the potential tax liability to to a variety of taxes, permits, and fees that informal businesses already pay. There are also implications for data quality. In fact, these registration efforts often end up collecting very poor or missing information. And this is because both in the case of registering taxpayers for non-tax purposes and in the case of mass registration campaigns, the incentive to tax collectors to record the right information are misplaced. This leads to very poor revenue gains from the tax administration, if not null, because taxpayers have very little or no tax liability. They are unaware of their tax obligations, or they are unable to comply. On the other side, there are very high administrative costs for tax administrations, as registering small businesses and cleaning a registry that is constantly bloated with inaccurate information and inactive taxpayer records is very time and resource intensive. As a second trend that we see and that we've been talking about is the use of IDs as a whole of government identifiers, which also affects and includes tax administrations. And the reason is that unique identifiers enable the use of third-party data, which are crucial in a modern tax administration for aims of identification and monitoring of taxable entities, from registration points to the possibility of cross-checking the validity of tax returns. Moreover, these unique identifiers across government are thought to improve taxpayer services in terms of timeliness, access, and pre-filing of returns, as Anders mentioned before. And as we said, this is dependent on unique identifiers across government. However, we find from our research that the use of these interoperability systems and exchange of data are limited in tax administration, and this is because the different institutions hold ID systems separately, and they're not, and these systems are not cleaned and updated so often, as well as the fact that the data held in these registries is often not fit for the purpose of tax administration. Therefore, there are some data quality implications, and the data quality of the data obtained depends on the state of the data received and on the ability to match all the records across different government registries. And because otherwise there is a risk of duplication and invalid records in the registry of the tax administration. We also find that migrating tax identification numbers to personal identification numbers in the specific case of Ghana does not improve perceptions of taxpayers in terms of easiness to comply, fairness of the tax system, and willingness to pay taxes. But we also see that the same taxpayers have a better compliance behavior in terms of filing and payment of taxes. To conclude, third-party data is crucial in modern tax administration, and it is crucial to have ID details that are linked to tax records, to tax registrations. It is also important, however, to note that the benefits of linking IDs with tax records, it's more in the possibility of grasping information about higher potential individuals, taxpayers, than to mass register new taxpayers. And it's important to note that in the process of creating data exchange between the tax administration and other institutions, it's important to consider the context, as, for example, the institutional capacity of the revenue administration, the opportunity cost of focusing on increasing the registration numbers, and also the nature and the state of the data that is acquired by the tax administration. This is the list of references that I'm happy to share later, and I am concluding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Celeste, for summarizing so brilliantly many years of research at ICTD on the topic. For anyone who's interested, as Celeste mentioned, you can just visit the ICTD website and find the full publications and summaries. Thanks. I think at this point, I also want to reiterate to the audience, feel free to use the chat box here and ask your questions. We're going to try to address them. I will now share the slides from Goethe and give him the floor. Just a second. please. Can you tell me if you see the slides?
Yeah, thank you, Fabrizio. Okay, so good afternoon, good morning, everyone. And me being me, I start with the conclusion and then I continue with the rest. And my conclusion is goodbye TIN and welcome NED, the national identification which you can use in all digital systems. And based on my experience from collecting taxes, there are really three pillars of good tax collection. And these three pillars are the three registries you need. You need a good civil registry, you need a good land registry, and you need a company registry. And today we focus on one of them. And Fabrizio, may you go to the next? So I start with the tax law, which is the area I know best. And actually, I don't feel comfortable with registering taxpayers, those who actually pay taxes, because as a taxman, subject to tax are all residents. So the focus of the tax administration are not so much on those who file. Those are the smallest problem. It's those not filing. So you have the three steps: who are subject to tax, what is the taxable income, and who needs to file. And for the filing, you have thresholds. And for most developing countries, those thresholds leave the bulk of the population out of the filing obligation. But still, as the taxman, you have this question: who should file but does not? And if we go back to the TIN now, it was an identifier you needed to get all this paper information into the computers. You need to have a unique identifier for the filings you got and get them into the computers. And at that time, it was sufficient, since the government had offices 1K away from its subjects. Like, we can go back to the organization Napoleon did with France back in the beginning of the 19th century with 320 some arrondissements, having people in walking distance from the government offices, including the taxman. So, and it was similar where I grew up on the west coast of Norway. We had 400 tax offices in Norway, 3 million people. The taxman knew the population, he got the filings, and he knew as a local resident who hadn't filed, who should file. Then when you go from the 1K away to the 1 click away tax administration, the computer in the capital does not know this. They have no idea about the population. So the TIN works well when you have this analog system of distributed tax offices. But then when you centralize it to a computer in the capital or somewhere else, then you all of a sudden need this double system, because you still need the local taxman to chase down those who should file but did not. And going from TIN to national ID, that's actually the key for being able to get any dividends from the digitalization. You can scale down the physical local presence. So for me, first, the tax law, everybody is liable to tax if you're a resident. So, and then it's about the facts on the ground, going from the 1K away taxman to the 1 click away taxman. Next, please. And this is not only the taxman problem, this is whole of government issue, like car registries and whatever, it's health and school and tax. So these are my reasons for saying goodbye tin. I need the NID, an ID, national identification. It's if you want to get the digital dividend, you really need it. And then you can take it in steps. I think the tax administration may spearhead such a move, but from my experience advising several countries, it's really, really, really hard to get a success without this being a government goal, and you need the cabinet and parliament to support this if you want a success. You need this final closure. What registry are we going to have, and a law which hammer out that this is going to be this country's national ID system. Next, please. So I spent most of my time working in a developed country, Norway, and our plate is full of common reporting standards, beneficial owner issues, ownership structures. And we try to the developing countries try to establish an international fence of data points to be able to do the tax audits digital. But any jurisdiction without a national ID system of some quality establish a hole in that fence. So there's kind of common interest and a possible win-win in if the developed countries want to close the fence, the gaps in the fence. You cannot do that without assisting those who are struggling to establish this kind of identity to get it. But then there's also, from several projects I've been part of, a drop of cold water, because getting NID is national ID is the easy part. And I refer back to Celeste and say quality, operating with quality, because having quality national ID, it's not a project. That the project is just the start. It's the day-to-day operation without end, where you every day need to assure that you get this right. So I think this is actually one of the biggest problem how the whole developing assistance is structured. We love projects. We hate indefinitely. And getting quality registers, that's every day for forever. Getting the computer is just the start. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gote, for this very thought-provoking presentation. I see that there are already some questions in the chat box. We will go through it later. Thanks so much. Lots of food for thought, for sure. I will now leave the floor to Sintayeu Mitiku, bringing a different perspective. Please, Sinta, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the sincering and the various ideas already forwarded. I'll be talking about the benefits of this transitioning, or just following up on Gote's thoughts on the transition from TINs to national IDs. We'll also be talking like key considerations, key factors to consider when it comes to these transitions for, I think, which many sub-Saharan African countries are considering, and some are already there. And then I will also try to brush up the experience from Ethiopia. So I think on the benefits, first of all, this the national IDs, they provide us this unique, uniquely and unambiguously identified taxpayers, but the national IDs, without combining them with other DPI components, for instance, the digital payments or digital financial systems, or proper data sharing mechanisms, may not yield in the ultimate or may not benefit the tax administration to apart from registration. So the benefits, you have to look at them in combination with these other factors. So one is, of course, improved compliance. As Anders already indicated, a 360 view of a taxpayer is now more feasible than it ever is. You can easily see transactions taxpayers, registered or unregistered for that matter, are engaged in when the transaction happens. So that means real time. You can easily detect non-registered taxpayers. In other words, we are basically, or this national IDs, they pave the way for formalizing what we normally call the informal sector. The other benefit of transitioning, if not migrating, integrating, is simplicity. So we have a lot of numbers, identity numbers, that individuals, legal persons or national persons use, and the more you merge them, the fact that you have one number to remember, it makes it easier. So that's the simplicity component. You also have to consider cost as another important element here. Administering and maintaining 2 or more registration systems and registration databases is quite expensive, especially when you are when you have embedded advanced identity mechanisms like biometric authentication. And finally, the most important element, at least from tax administration perspective, is the data itself, the accuracy, the integrity, and the consistency of data. So national IDs provide you with the ability to uniquely identify tax individual citizens or residents, and that is similar or consistent data is available everywhere. So and there could be, of course, definitely there are much more benefits. So what are the factors to consider if you are planning to transition into this new or national ID based tax administration? Basically, first of all, is the maturity of the of the national ID system. By that I mean is the system and the environment ecosystem reliable? Is it secured? Secured enough? Is it scalable enough? Because the moment you link it with team, you gotta make sure that it works, or the downtime is quite minimal from system perspective, and that it is scalable to accommodate a growing number of taxpayers. The other thing is you have to ask whether you have sufficient process interoperability. Everybody talks about technical interoperability, and I think in many countries, and this is also the case from the research in ICTD, some of the researchers, we always focus on the technical interoperability component, but we forgot the process. So these tax administrations are using the national IDs just for the registration component, which is the first one. But then data is not static, so you have to consider modifications and deregistration so that you have consistent data across different platforms. You also have to see the IT infrastructure and the tax system. Can it easily integrate with the national ID system? What kind of investment is needed to not only to integrate it, but also to maintain that integration? The other factor that you have to consider is the coverage and inclusion of the national ID. What I mean by coverage is, to what part of, what percentage of potential taxpayers or residents are, tax residents are covered with this national ID, and what's the scope, what's the plan? For instance, in Ethiopia, there were about 550 or something tax centers where individuals, individual taxpayers potentially can register. However, right after the introduction of the integration with the national ID system, that number reduced to close to 200. The registration numbers is fairly okay, even even after that, but it effectively means that some taxpayer groups are excluded, or it makes it a bit difficult for them to easily get TIN numbers. And also you have to look at the regulatory and the legal framework. So you have to consider privacy, you have to consider what kind of data to share, when to share that data, and how to secure it, both data at rest as well as data in transition. And finally, you have to look at stakeholder engagement, especially in countries which have invested a lot in their TIN infrastructure. The transition has to be properly planned. Otherwise, there will potentially be some resistance from the different stakeholders. You also should be able to identify who your key stakeholders are in this transition, in designing not necessarily the silver bullet tax TIN system, but at least an improved tax system. Like you have to consider social security, you have to consider banks, you have to consider telecom and mobile money operators. So you need to be able to, or tax administration should be able to consider all of these factors when deciding the transition. The current outcomes, what we have seen in Ethiopia, in a few other places that I've worked in, is that of course there is going to be an improved operational efficiency, cost savings as indicated earlier. There is a broader tax base, but as Celeste indicated earlier, without which does not necessarily mean that there is an increased revenue collection, because to increase the revenue collection, the ID is one of the foundational aspects, but you have to combine it with the other elements. And there is definitely an improved data quality, pending, of course, regularization or mapping of all the things with the new national IDs. But what are the future prospects? Given the increased focus on national IDs, we sure can see improved tax compliance. We can see advanced analytics that that focuses on predictive, not only predictive, but prescriptive, the compliance behavior of taxpayers. We can also start designing or integrating, some sort of artificial intelligence into our tax systems, whereby risk models, various risk models can be developed, because you have now a large set of data which is made available because of digital IDs. When it comes to the case of Ethiopia, so the TINs were introduced, or at least the current registration in 1994, and then soon after that the TIN system, which embedded maybe one of the few TIN registration systems in Africa which has already embedded biometric identification. There was a mass registration of individual taxpayers, unfortunately without necessarily tying it to revenue collection. The TIN database shows more than 6.5 million individuals, within the tax system. The tax laws also allow data sharing, or they give a lot of ground for the tax administration to capture quite a lot of data from line ministries and from the third parties, but that has been quite difficult because not everybody uses the TIN as an identifier anywhere in their system. So considering this, the tax administration decided to migrate, or to integrate with the national ID in 2023, that particularly focused on registration. Generally speaking, that registration process is quite smooth. However, like I told you earlier, the number of tax registration centers have significantly reduced. Coverage is still an issue, but like God said, there is a strong government will and a strong push from the parliament to continue using the national ID and tying it to almost all services. So now, you want to get a mobile money or a SIM card, or you want to register your property, your vehicles and whatnot. So all of it is being tied to this national ID. It means the tax administration suddenly has this massive amount of data that it can use to analyze and determine, the behavior of taxpayers. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sintayew. for providing important technical considerations, and also for telling us more about the experience from Ethiopia. I think now we will move to Joy, which will bring a totally different perspective, equally essential. Joy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fabrizio, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this meeting. And I think it does come at an appropriate time because we have been discussing integrated identification systems over at ATAF, particularly with our technical committee, which is made up of various tax officials from a few of our member countries. And what we have been discussing and will be publishing by the end of this month is a centralized coordinated platform that consolidates various forms of individual identification into a unified system. And that's for natural persons, so both citizens and non-citizens, and for entities. And I think from one of the examples I'll present, the separation between natural persons and entities has been a bit of a mixed bag for some countries. The aim really is to streamline identification processes, to enhance accuracy, improve the ease of access to government services. But at the heart of it is actually ensuring that you have one source of truth regarding identification. And I mean, we already know, and it's already been pointed out extensively, that this is especially important for tax authorities, for maintaining accurate taxpayer records, for tracking individuals and businesses' economic activity, detection of false identities, and so on. So there are a variety of benefits, of course, for tax administration across the board. But the question, I think, is what are the and the questions that you've raised are, what are the key factors you have to take into consideration when you're thinking about integrated systems? And from my perspective, I think quite a bit has already been raised, but I maybe want to re-emphasize some points and maybe raise a few new ones. Because of the nature of challenges that have been faced on the continent, I think we are all aware of the story in Kenya and in other countries around privacy and security violations, exclusion, so talking about the digital divide, technology and design issues, and the lack of cooperation between key agencies. There are a few I think that we have to get right. One is integrity, because it does matter to the public opinion, to gaining public trust, which takes me to the next point, is trust. You do have to gain trust in the system in order for it to be fully implemented. Otherwise, you have a white elephant that the citizens will not agree to use. Transparency is key. You need to be transparent about the kind of technology you're using, about the fact that agencies are exchanging data and accessing that data. You need to be transparent altogether about the process of adopting the integrated identification system. The other factor is an enabling legal framework and a strong governance framework. And that enabling legal framework goes from top to bottom. One is the level of integration required. Is it enabled by the legal framework? Is it permitted by the legal framework? Can you engage as authorities? So there's a variety of agencies that need to cooperate in order to make the system effective and efficient. Are they enabled to actually cooperate by the legal system? Are they enabled to exchange that information? And how are they enabled to exchange that information? So a big question that's coming up is, when we think about technology adoption, does the legal framework permit the use of that type of technology? And you know, this is especially important for new technologies like blockchain and so on. The other thing is about the strong governance framework, and I think that connects very strongly to interagency cooperation, which is key to integration. It's really the foundation for integrating systems and matching data and then pulling out this integrated identification system. I think one of the kind of missing and essential aspects is the people aspect. How do we manage the change that's required for us to engage in this very sensitive process of integrating very sensitive data? I think that's a very important question, especially where we've had quite a few challenges just within single agencies on their own. And we know that silos are a big problem across the African continent. The other question is about infrastructure development and system design. We consider what is possible and what's not possible. You're going to have to evaluate at what level of technology transformation is each of the agencies involved in the process. And oftentimes you might find that the tax authority is far ahead of other institutions involved. This can, of course, bring up issues for integration. The other question is about the standardization of data, how that data is presented, how you clean that data and migrate that data is another question as well. And already we're seeing challenges in terms of cleansing and migration just with tax administrations on their own, even if they are the more advanced institution in a country. Well, there's a few other issues. The high level of endorsement, you need a high level political office to endorse and support the process in order for cooperation to take place. You need to identify a lead agency that takes ownership of the process. A big question we've been asking is the tax authority the right institution to take the lead in this process? We've seen it in some countries, like in Australia, the ATO have taken the lead in the digital ID process. It can be possible, but I think it requires the tax authority to drive the digitalization process across government. That means that you have to be a leader, both in implementing, but also in supporting implementation amongst other agencies. And that takes a lot of capacity, which already tax administrations are struggling with internally. So that's already a massive project that you'd be undertaking. The question has been raised, should we replace tax information numbers? And I don't want to take a specific stance. I actually think it's very important that it's based on an assessment of the context. It's dependent on the capacity of the country to implement it as well. Like I said, if you make the tax administration the lead organization in the process, maybe they can make the TIN the main number, or the NID, as we've said, but it will depend on how much they can drive the process and how much support they have in driving the process as well. It can be, useful to just have a unified number, or the NID, as Scott has talked about, and phase out the use of the TIN if you want to. But a one-size-fits-all approach is not always the best. I think countries really have to assess their capacity. They have to assess the interest and willingness of citizens to kind of journey onto that integrated identification system approach. I think part of tailoring the approach is based on assessment and very strong planning. You have to decide which number is going to be the NID, or whether the new NID will be created. But the process has to be based on consultation, and it needs to be very transparent, as I've already said. And I think when we talk about the legal framework and discuss what needs to be keenly considered, aside from facilitating the technology aspects, one of the key points, I think, is about data privacy and confidentiality, and the integrity of the systems that we're talking about. I just want to quickly bring up the example of Kenya. I think we already have maybe seen in the media that we adopted the Maisha number. Sorry, I'm Kenyan, so when I say we, I mean my country. We adopted the Maisha number, the Maisha card, digital ID, and National Population Master Register. So far, not so good. Major challenges have been public resistance, their privacy concerns, their concerns about the misuse of personal data, concerns about data breaches as well, and of course, concerns about the digital divide. We're not quite there in terms of connectivity across the country. So actually, the process has faced a number of obstacles, and we haven't quite made it. I personally don't have a Maisha number as yet, but there are other good examples on the continent. We do have case studies in our publication from Mauritius, where they have a number of NIDs, and Mauritius had to take into consideration the fact that they do have a number of non-residents doing business in their country, given their location and the benefits of being located in Mauritius. So what they have is a number for citizens, which is the NIC, the National Identification Card. That's an official identifier for just the citizens. Then there's a number for non-citizens, which is the non-citizen ID. And then resident legal persons, which is the business registration number, and non-resident business persons also receive a business registration number. Now, I think it's maybe important that we begin to discuss this division between natural persons and entities, because it's quite important, especially when we talk about beneficial ownership, that you can create the link between these networks of information. If we focus too much on natural persons, we'll end up kind of stuck with one pool of information that doesn't really lead us anywhere. So I'm glad that Got talked about an efficient land registry, an efficient business registry, and so on. I'm gonna I'm going to take a stop here, but just to highlight that trust, transparency, integrity, and a consultative process are extremely important, especially on the African continent, where trust in digital processes is still growing. We're still getting to understand what it means and how it should work. So we really need to have to assess and plan effectively. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joy. That was extremely insightful. I also understand that Adaf will come up with a publication on the topic, and I really look forward to read it. Great. I think now we have 10 minutes for Q&A, and we received lots of comments in the chat. I will try to put some order here, and probably we could start with a question that Goethe, I think, would like to answer around what the expiration time, the date of IDs as compared to TIN, if I understood correctly. Goethe, you feel free to address this one.
Thank you. Yes, it's cradle to grave and some years beyond until the estate is settled. It's the difference between having one ID from cradle to grave and that the card documenting that you are that identity having an expiring date. So if a country redo the registration every time the card expire, then they really need to start thinking, because it needs to be one identity. The card may expire, but you get a new card with the same identity. Thank you.
Thanks, Goethe. I think we have a number of questions around what about companies, right? What about business IDs? And I think here, Anders, I remember you have a good answer to that. Goethe as well, if you feel like to intervene. But Anders, you want to try to address this one?
I think if we double click on business IDs, there's several issues, right? You could have, for example, a company that's selling into our country and they need to register for VAT purposes. So how do you deal with that? You can have like the EU with as a central registration, right? You can also have the World Bank has talked a lot about business ready or doing business. How can you minimize the transaction costs for a company that want to get started, right? So that's where the issue comes in, not just of exchanging data between the company registry and the tax authority, but it's a joint decision making. You cannot have a company existing that only has a company ID. It also needs a tax ID and needs to be registered, right? So some kind of joint decision making is important. So that's why we need to go beyond accessing third party data, that kind of thing, to joint decision making. I think those are two of my insights.
Thank you. Goethe?
If I may add, no country should allow anyone without a very well-established identity to form a company and register a company. Like companies without the ID of the chair and the owner, then you're asking for problem. Start with the humans.
Well put, Goethe, thanks. I'm looking at Celeste here because in our study in Uganda, I think there was also a component of integration with the business IDs, but then the process has been halted after a few times. I don't know, Celeste, if you feel like you want to elaborate a bit more on that.
Yeah, surely, Fabrizio. So in that case, so this was the phase where the Uganda Revenue Authority was using the business registry to basically enable a quicker identification of businesses and enable an instant registration of tax registration of the business. And the issue with this kind of exercise was that while at registration point, the taxpayer was inputting the business registration number, and the URA system, Uganda Revenue Authority system, would pull the data from the business registry. The data that the Uganda Revenue Authority was pulling was not verifiable, in the sense that it was not. It wasn't. The URA couldn't really identify whether the taxpayer was inputting the right data or not, and the data obtained from the business registry was not enough for the revenue authority to establish anything about the tax liability of the business, nor to contact, for example, the business and start the compliance journey, due to the fact that the business registry was really, really outdated. So there were issues with contact details of the business, location of the business, and even sector of the business, because it's very common that under the same business registration number, throughout the years, businesses change scope and activities, and this was not kind of captured in the business registry, which completely prevented URA from making good use of the data obtained, which is why the process was altered ultimately and rethought about. Yes, so these are my 2 cents. So there is a problem of data quality, basically, when getting data from the business registry, for example, in this country, which might be the case for other countries.
Fantastic. Thanks, Celeste. I think there is another important question here around federal states, right? There was a nice kind of practical example from Akbanke with states with one national ID, one national revenue body, and 37 subnational tax administrations. I look here at Sintayel. If you have any reaction to this on how to have a unique digital IDs in a context of a federal state like Ethiopia.
Yeah, and so in this context, I think having unique identifier, one national unique identifier, is very important. Whether that is TIN or the national ID, that depends obviously on on a number of factors. So states potentially have their own laws, tax laws and whatnot, so they can definitely manage their taxes. However, you need to have a single tax register, potentially possibly managed at the federal level, and then the others can manage the specific tax type. So here we have the same case. I think in Nigeria it is the same, where you have the federal the Inland Revenue Service managing the TIN register, while states have their own taxes or obligations that they manage.
Thanks, Cynthia. I don't know if Gote, you want to add something to that based on your experience with.
Yeah, I think for federal countries, it's obvious that you really need to get this sorted out on the federal level, or else you will just create dysfunctionality between the regions of the federation.
Thanks. Yes, that makes sense. I think I have now a question that I will get direct to Joy, which I think it's interesting. How will the new system, probably basically the sort of integrated system, improve transparency for taxpayers in terms of the use of their taxes?
That's actually a great, it's a great question. And one of the things we've been thinking about is actually how you can use it to target taxpayer services better, and group your taxpayers into kind of different. Well, you'd have to define the characteristics, right? And then group them based on the characteristics as well, and service them based on those characteristics. I think it could also be a really important tool for the informal sector, if we can get it right, that is. But yeah, it does have a lot of potential to be able to improve education programs for taxpayers, and then targeted engagement with taxpayers, especially where we're moving towards voluntary compliance programs. But we do have to evaluate how that's going to work out as African countries are facing austerity and stronger demand for revenue collection. So there's a balance to be struck, but it's definitely an important consideration. Thanks.
Thanks, Joy. I think we received another question, probably the last one for today, for you from Opelo Mabua, which is around how can tax administration efficiently integrate as many important third-party systems without necessarily infringing the data protection protocols. Maybe we can address this one and
Yeah,
yes.
no, this is a great question. I think Anders is also dealing with this problem at the same time. So, I mean, first I have to say maybe I don't have the right answer to this question because it's a live issue at the moment, is how do you deal with data protection requirements? I think the first thing is it's very important for revenue authorities to first inform themselves about how their current integration, their current exchange of information is impacted by data protection requirements. Not every country has a comprehensive protocol, and that's going to be a big challenge, of course, where you're exchanging data cross-border as well. But I think that's the first question. The next is there are some that might want to sit above the data protection legal framework. And so you might know that in some countries, the tax authority has the powers to access data that are almost, one might say, out of control, but that are over and above what would be expected, and managing that against data protection is another question. So I haven't answered your question because it's an important consideration that we do need to discuss, but I want to ask Anders to also come in and say something. Thanks.
There is a partial answer from a technical angle. It is called federated computing. So what we have done in the tax world over the last 2, 3, 4 decades is amassing information that we get in our system. But that means we are taking the data to the question we have. The other way around is to take our question to the data. Let's take, for example, we want to have access to the police's database. That's very sensitive. But if we were to ask a question, say, do you have anything on this taxpayer? And the answer is no. So then you have very little privacy issues. You still have some, but you have minimized a lot the issue, right? So you could have a system where you would send out questions and get answers back, right? So there is some thinking in this space that would be worth tapping into.
Fantastic. I think we sadly we reached the hour already, and there are many questions left unanswered. I think this is a nice case of outreach, showing outreach and insightful this discussion's been. I want to thank all the speakers for your contributions, and especially I want to thank all the participants, as many as 100 today. I know it's a busy week for everyone, so thanks so much for taking time away from it to join this conversation. There's going to be more sessions in the future. I don't want to make any spoilers now, but we're working already on the next webinar session. So please watch this space. Thank you again, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Förlåt.